Digg is relaunching. Now, if you don't know what Digg is,
I don't know. It's just like when a rock band that everyone stopped caring about gets back together.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
and I'm Chris Saad. On today's show, we are going to discuss the stock market tanking hard, thanks to Trump's tariffs and all sorts of chaos. We are also going to discuss the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. That announcement came out. It moved Bitcoin, but not in the right direction. We're going to explain why. Also on the docket, we're going to discuss Apple Intelligence. Apple is delaying Apple Intelligence until next year. Can you believe this? What does it mean for Apple, for iPhone, for iOS? And should we switch to Android? Yaniv and I are going to have an Android versus Apple debate. Oh my God, you knew it was going to happen. Stay tuned to find out which side we're on. We're going to talk about Digg relaunching. If you don't know what Digg is, that means you're a lot less old than us. I will tell you what it was about, why it might be important that it's coming back, and the surprising partnership that's come together to make that happen. And then finally, in Trend Corner, we're discussing an idea from Chamath from All In about moving from blurred lines to clear lines. Is Trump having an accidental benefit on the world? And finally, revenue per employee, the new hot metric. Should you be paying attention to how much money you're making per employee? Is that the only number that counts now? All this and much more on this week's show. Stay tuned right after the break.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
So our first topic is, wouldn't you believe it? The stock market is down. It seems like there's no end in sight. Every day is just a sharp line down to the right. We are down 5.3% on the S&P 500 year to date. We are, negative where we were when Trump started. And, people are, the reasons to blame are pretty straightforward. I think, tariffs, uncertainty, on again, off again, nonsense from Trump. And, the Magnificent Seven has been hurt really, really bad. My portfolio is mostly Magnificent Seven, plus a little bit of other stuff. And I'm down 20% here year to date. So what do you make of this, Yaniv? What's going on? Is it going to snap straight back as soon as Trump pulls his head in and someone tells him to stop being an idiot? Or is this the proper correction we needed to have because there was an overinflated AI hype cycle?
I don't think it's about the AI hype cycle. Actually, Chris, what we have here is there was a big Trump bump that has now gone away. So ever since Donald Trump won the election, the markets were on a tear, right? And they were actually up quite a bit. And it was a bit hard to understand given all the policies that he'd stated. But I think if people look back to the first Trump term, the idea was, well, ultimately what Trump stands for is tax cuts and good old Republican stuff that makes more money for rich people. And so all of this other bluster isn't something to take all that seriously. But nonetheless, it was weird how much the stock market ran up with Trump coming into office with all the things he was talking about. And, there was this, from the first Trump term, there was this idea of taking Trump seriously, but not literally. I would say the markets, I don't know if they took him seriously, but they definitely didn't take him literally when he talked about tariffs and all the other global destabilization he was planning on doing. And I think what's happened is, he really did mean that stuff. So now people are starting to take him seriously. So if you are the stock market and you have a new regime that is authoritarian, protectionist, isolationist, that is not good for your business. So of course, stock markets are going down. And the truth is, at the end of the Biden term, they were already at historic highs based on a bunch of traditional metrics, especially PE multiples. So they were already very well valued. Then Donald Trump came into office. They went up even more for no good reason. And now reality is setting in. So it's like, well, okay, if all of this is happening, this is not good for the economy. And apparently there are some leading indicators of how the US economy is doing, of US GDP. And they have very rapidly turned negative just in the last few weeks. So the markets are reacting to the fact that, well, this situation could actually be really bad for us if we end up in the middle of a trade war. And if we lose all our allies, that is not good for business.
This is not just, fascism and protectionism. This is capriciousness and randomness. There doesn't seem to be any fucking logic to what he's doing. The worst part is like the whole Canada and Mexico thing seems like it's not even connected to economics and trade wars and disparity between imports and exports there. He's talking about fentanyl and making it about like controlling the border. And so there's not even an economic component to this. It's not like there's some upside economically when it all gets resolved. He's making enemies of the allies and trying to make friends with the enemies. It really doesn't make any sense at all. I've spent weeks and weeks and just months trying to put myself in the heads of the MAGA,
Oh, you poor bastard.
tech elite.
Why would you do that to yourself?
Because, incorrect information, or rather, new information can often appear incorrect. And profoundly new information can at first appear profoundly incorrect. And so I'm sitting there thinking, like, what am I missing? Maybe all of the media narratives about him being a fascist wannabe are overstated. Maybe the end of democracy is overstated. Maybe the death of meritocracy is real. Maybe the Democrats have been really holding growth back with their, vague crypto policies and their DEI bullshit. And maybe I'm just not getting it. And so I've been trying to fit my head into this narrative and try to understand its merits, its benefits. There's no compensating for the incompetence of these people and the meanness and actually the kind of the thin-skinned and hypocrisy of it all. And they're just, I thought maybe the tariffs were a negotiating strategy. What is he negotiating? There's nothing to negotiate with Canada. Nothing. It doesn't make any fucking sense. None.
I'd like to say that Donald Trump has in fact achieved the impossible, which is to really piss off a Canadian. I've never seen Canadians so angry. A famously even-keeled, relaxed, chilled-out people are mad as hell at Donald Trump, and there are all sorts of boycotts and things going on over there that are really hurting American business.
And, the thing that's equally maddening, and, I just have too much faith in people or in logic, but is watching people like the All In podcast and other Trump supporters trying to rationalize it and explain it away and focus on other things and, try to continue to thread the needle and dance on the head of a pin. And it's just like, you are just pissing away your reputations and your credibility. And it's so obvious that you're avoiding reckoning with the truth. I don't mean to pick on the All In guys, but it's just,
Oh no, please pick on them.
well, they're just, they're tech heavy. They're friends with some of these people. They've been some of the biggest cheerleaders. And to watch Jason Calacanis, who is like the most sniveling weakling of them all, because he doesn't even seem to have strong convictions about anything. He just like pussyfoots around and sits on the fence and he's trying to talk to David Sachs like he's bestie and like, oh, David, tell us more about whatever, sorry, I'm asking you the hard questions. And it's like, dude, what you're doing is so obvious, and you're just trying to suck up and stay in the club, even though you don't, this is bullshit, and stop pretending like you don't. And so at least David Sachs is like sells it better, and so it just drives me crazy.
That's a scary situation, but yes, I think like to try to bring this back to startups to a certain extent, Chris, it's that the economy, which looked like it was coming out of a funk, the global economy, like the inflation had gotten under control. It wasn't all sunshine and lollipops, but things were looking pretty good. And that, of course, trickles back down into the startup market. We are now dealing with a whole lot of volatility. And, I spoke to a founder recently who said, we are already feeling the impacts of Trump's policy in the US, and we're changing our growth plans and we're changing our burn plans. So that chilling effect, it can work its way down pretty quickly. And so if you're a startup founder, I'd have to say, prepare for a great deal of volatility. There was this weird honeymoon period, like I said, where people said, oh, Trump's going to get in, but he's not going to do any of the crazy shit that's going to tank the global economy that he says he's going to do. Well, now he's doing it. And so we are in a very dangerous phase for the economy. And if you're a startup founder, I would say be conservative with your cash, extend your runway, be careful and retain a bit of flexibility and the ability to respond as circumstances change.
Yeah, so 2 points on that. The first is you said this is washing away the Trump gains, the kind of ill-gotten gains, the inexplicable gains when he won. I mean, for the S&P 500 and certainly for my portfolio, this is way deeper than that, right? We're a pullback that goes below where we were on November 5th. And so this is, he's
Only by a little bit at the moment. There's more to go.
yeah, but there's more to go. And so this is not now no longer the Trump. This is not washing away the Trump bump. This is now pricing in the Trump chaos. And so we're going to get a Trump tax on a headwind on the market. You mentioned about, being more conservative and extending your runway. Go listen to the back catalog. There's an art to this, right? So what you cannot do is raise capital and spend it frivolously, but that does not mean you shouldn't be keeping the right people around to spend capital wisely. So this is, often you see like founders just shedding staff or focusing on execution capacity. You need to keep the strategic players around because they're helping you deploy capital wisely. I just want to put that out there because, extending capital to nowhere is not the point. You need to, the point is to deploy capital wisely and make sure that you're still hitting your goals.
I agree, but I think I wanted to debate that one again because I think it's a really interesting and it's a deep point, right? I think one way of considering this is the value of the capital you have, right? I think when circumstances are difficult, your capital is in a sense more valuable to you. So while you still need to be bold, you still need to deploy it for that massive outcome. You don't just want to sort of go back into your shell. I think it does make sense to think, okay, every dollar I spend is in a sense more expensive than a dollar I would have spent in an up economy. So I need to spend it more carefully. And it's a great time to look at all your costs, right? And for a couple of reasons. One is, if you have a crisis like this, I feel that nearly every startup is doing too many things. Here's a great time to think, should we be doing fewer things? And can we cut costs by doing so? Secondly, we talk about this secular trend of AI that is really allowing startups to be more efficient with their capital, do more with fewer people, with less tooling, and so on. So use this opportunity, the urgency with which you might be wanting to pull out that sharp pencil and see if you can be leaner. I think it goes up. So don't be stupid, don't be conservative, don't slow play it, but think, can I be a leaner, meaner version of myself? Well, I would say the urgency of answering that question has gone up with the increase of chaos in the world.
Capital efficiency, ROI is everything. And so absolutely, So related to this, the Bitcoin strategic reserve was announced in this weird haphazard way. The main upshot of it is actually the government is not necessarily, and I say that word very precisely, it's not necessarily buying more Bitcoin. It is basically announcing a strategy to audit, collect, and hold the Bitcoin that's already confiscated, as well as look for other revenue neutral ways of potentially accumulating more. So that last part might actually involve it buying a little more somehow, but it's not exactly clear how. What is interesting about that is that also dipped the price of Bitcoin, that announcement, because it was a bit of a buy the rumor, sell the news moment. But also I think it was a bit of a letdown because I think Bitcoin holders were feeling like the government is going to put taxpayer dollars behind buying Bitcoin, which is going to massively inflate the price of Bitcoin. And that's not so far been what the announcement is. I actually agree here with Jason Calacanis, having just thrown him under the bus. It doesn't make a lot of sense to spend taxpayer money to just be accumulating Bitcoin necessarily. It could be seen as a wealth transfer to wealthy people who have Bitcoin. There are counter arguments. People say, the government spends money or allocates its balance sheet to all sorts of strategic reserves. And there's no reason why this is anything else than that. And it should spend taxpayer dollars on that. I think given all the grifts and bullshit the Trump administration has done, I would err on the side of not letting them spend taxpayer money on anything speculative at the moment. So I think this is probably a good middle of the road announcement that just solidifies Bitcoin as being relevant, but not the US government is like pumping it for all the Bitcoin fanboys out there.
I think they actually are pumping it. I think the take that they had on the Pivot podcast is the right one. What they're doing is not revenue neutral, right? Because what generally happens with seized assets is the government sells them, right? And therefore they get US dollars. If you remember that, that is actually the US currency. And that goes to general revenue. So by holding on to all this Bitcoin that have been seized, that is in fact a revenue negative thing. It reduces the total revenue of the government. And that is going to be needing to be made up in other ways. And it seems pretty insane when there's this manufactured crisis around the debt and the deficit to do things that are actually going to make it worse. And so, yeah, it might seem like this clever thing where it's like, oh, all we do is not sell the Bitcoin we already have, but that still hits revenue. And what you're doing is effectively creating a kind of a sovereign wealth fund that is concentrated in a few crypto assets that happen to be held by Donald Trump's mates and all the people who backed him. David Sachs, we'll give him another mention here. It kind of feels gross, but yeah, the sell-off happened because it wasn't as bold as it could have been. They're not actually spending government money, but it's just another one of that list of things that makes no sense. Except as a fun headline and as a grift that helps support the people who put Donald Trump in office.
I guess that's right. Technically, they're not getting US dollars revenue from these things. As someone who believes in Bitcoin and the future of digital currency, stateless, issuer-free, permissionless, trustless money, I believe Bitcoin is a very valuable, very important innovation. I think it's a fairly reasonable thing to allocate some proportion of the US mind share, US government's machinery, to holding it, to thinking about it, to pass laws about it, and to integrate it into the global financial system. And so, yeah, okay, it's not strictly speaking revenue neutral in the sense that the US government is not getting US dollars for it, but I think that's perfectly fine. And if it goes up the way everyone expects and predicts, and the way it's been going up since its origin, the origin block, I think it'll be a net positive for the US government and therefore for taxpayers.
Those are our thoughts on the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. What do you think? Good idea or just a waste of taxpayers' money? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
Let's talk about topic number 3, which is, we're moving away from a little bit of politics, but don't worry, we'll come back to that toward the end.
I don't think anyone's worried.
Apple has announced that they're delaying Apple Intelligence, the rolling out the rest of Apple Intelligence until next year, which is insane to me. They announced the iPhone 16 as the device for Apple Intelligence. They basically did a bunch of false advertising, pretending like the features were already there. They've been rolling out slowly over the course of, 6 to 12 months. And the features they have rolled out have been lackluster, to say the least. Some of them have actually been annoying. And Siri is still a piece of junk, like complete piece of junk. And the rest is not coming out until next year. I'm actually rethinking my lock-in into the Apple ecosystem. I saw a video the other day of showing the kind of the invisible pen where you can remove objects from photos. They're showing the Apple one and the Google one, and the Apple one is just junk. It just didn't really work at all. And the Google one took a little longer, but it was brilliant. I've used Siri now. I'm trying to use Siri more. Every single time I use it, it shits the bed in some way. I think Apple is really struggling here. And the other rumor is that it's delaying their other device strategy. So they had this, iPad style home device that would follow you around was the rumor, kind of a home center, home controlling surface. These are all dependent on a lot of Apple Intelligence stuff. And so there's also the rumor, or the analysts are reporting that this is delaying their hardware strategy as well. Big deal for Apple, and especially in the face of Alexa, Plus and Google's announcements. They're moving quickly on it.
I think it's interesting. If you kind of look back at Apple over the last couple of decades, I think they have really gotten quite bad at software. They were never a pure software company. What they've always been really good at is crafting hardware with beautiful integrated software experiences. Now, I've been an Android user since way back because I worked at Google when Android first came out, and they gave me free phones, which is a good way to lock me in. But I think it's very clear, like in the early days of the iPhone versus Android, Apple had a hardware advantage, but they also had an integrated experience advantage. Beautiful software working well with beautiful hardware, and just a really nice user experience. I decided a few years ago to make the switch to Apple, to an iPhone, and going from a more recent version of Android to iOS was a really underwhelming experience. I don't think the software was better. In a lot of ways, I actually think it was worse. And after a year, I switched back to Android, and I really haven't regretted it. iPad is a weird bit of software where it still doesn't really make proper use of the form factor. If you look at macOS, it doesn't feel to me like there have been any significant improvements for the last decade. And so reflecting on all of this, as you say, Chris, I feel like Apple's ability to build good software has really atrophied. And they still have the best hardware, and they have the legacy of software that they built a long time ago, but their ability to innovate on it and make it better seems to have really gone away. And I don't know when that rut set in. If we have any listeners who work at Apple or who know people who work at Apple and understand what's happening internally, we'd love to hear from you. It's a bit of a sort of a closed system. You don't hear much from what happens inside of Apple, but I can't think of the last time that Apple has really impressed with a software release as opposed to a piece of hardware.
I'm hesitant to say. I think one of the senior leaders at Apple Intelligence is an old friend of mine, and so I would be a bit embarrassed if you'd watch this actually, because I'm kind of ripping into it, and I'm sure there are a lot of factors inside the business that are making this very difficult. Look, it's hard to understand the Apple magic. There's a lot of factors to it, and it's not enough to say that they're good at software, they're bad at software, or they're good at innovation, they're bad at innovation. They just have a very different focus. They're not interested in being first, and they're not interested in being the most feature rich, and they're not just a hardware company. And in some cases, the hardware isn't even, mostly it's better, but it's sort of like a Porsche-like philosophy. I'm a big car nerd, as a lot of long-time listeners will know, and it's this kind of inexorable, iterative improvement. And you're not supposed to feel like there's been much revelation. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, it's supposed to feel like creeping improvement that is somewhat subtle and nuanced, but everything just works. And when you look back 2, 3, 5 versions, you're like, wow, this is really improved. I think the problem with Apple Intelligence is they kind of broke their own rule. They broke their own philosophy. They said, oh shit, we have to catch this moment. Let's make a bunch of promises. Let's build a bunch of software. Let's do a bunch of stuff. Let's pre-announce it, throw a bunch of shit at the wall, and try to catch this moment because we are in a big strategic risk here. And it's almost like what they should have done is done what Apple always does, which says, we don't care about the hype. We don't care about the noise. We're going to ship when we're good and damn ready. And we're going to ship thoughtful features that actually work. And so I think this is the part of the problem here, is that they're not good at innovating and iterating quickly in large step function ways. They're good at incremental, very considered incremental improvement. And so, I think that's the problem here, amongst other things.
I mean, respectfully, you're somewhat contradicting yourself, because I think what you're saying is that Siri has been bad for a long time and continues to be bad with the addition of Apple Intelligence. Siri was not iteratively improved towards perfection. It was neglected and it fell way behind the industry. I think in some ways, iOS has fallen behind Android as a user experience. I think Apple Photos has fallen behind Google Photos. Apple Podcasts has fallen way behind Spotify. They own podcasts. It's named after them. Like they named the technology, and the use of Apple Podcasts continues to shrink. So I think this idea of iterating towards perfection, I think that philosophy served them well 10 years ago, but it has now become nearly a substitute for a failure to be able to truly innovate. And you say, well, you're not supposed to notice it's better, but if you look at something from 5 years ago, you'll notice the difference. Now, I think between an iPhone 4 and an iPhone 8, absolutely. Between an iPhone 16 and an iPhone 12, I think you find if you go back to an older iPhone with the version of iOS it had at the time, you wouldn't think this was way worse. And now I can suddenly see how they've shaved off all the rough edges. It's nearly kind of gone to this level of stasis where it's just like it's reached its terminus and there isn't any real move to go beyond what was there. And so Apple's technology it somehow feels dated in some ways.
No, I think this is the classic Android argument, right? And we're now going to get into a religious war, but
Yes.
I think the products they don't give a shit about definitely hit stasis, and they have not given shit about Siri for too long. That's true. They've completely missed the boat on the personal assistant. They've completely missed the boat on the home ecosystem, and the products they choose to not invest in go nowhere. But when the products that they choose to invest in have this slow, inexorable improvement, they don't improve in the way you necessarily want them to. If you're an Android user, you want more features, more power, more design changes, more whatever. They're only interested in the stuff that they believe matters. And so, for Apple Music, for example, what they believe matters is the quality of the music. So they just keep adding, lossless and spatial audio and a headphone that can do spatial audio, and a hermetically sealed relationship between the headphone and the player and all this stuff. Now, I agree with you on the margin, which is this strategy kind of only works to its fullest degree when you have someone with taste and intuition and judgment in the business. And that was Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. So it is definitely losing steam when you have an operations guy, a supply chain guy at the head of the business. Are they firing on all cylinders? No. Have they reached the terminus, or is this strategy not a great strategy? Also, no. If they're able to get back to having someone with taste and judgment at the head of it, and they're also not making the mistake of trying to take a step too fast with a Siri and a Apple Intelligence, I think there's still the potential for them to keep moving in the right direction. But they've certainly made a number of missteps recently.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
All right, those were our thoughts about Apple and Apple Intelligence and the way they roll things out. What do you guys agree? Is this Apple slowing down, losing steam, or is this just the way Apple rolls? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. The final topic we want to talk about before we get to Trend Corner is Digg is relaunching. Now, if you don't know what Digg is, you're really young. You just missed the whole last cycle of the social web. There was, just as a quick recap, there was, the web came out, and there was Web 2.0. Web 2.0 was all about Ajax. It was all about kind of like real-time updating web pages. And Web 2.0 sort of was inherently social, and it became more about the social web and social apps. And one of the biggest social apps, social communities, was Digg, D-I-G-G. It was actually like Reddit. I'm struggling to remember now which one came first.
I think Digg definitely came first.
Reddit was around. Was it Digg came first? I think like Reddit was around, but it was this kind of niche subculture thing. Digg became a mainstream Reddit and beat Reddit at its own game. And then Digg shot itself in the face, and Reddit was able to keep going. I think that was my memory of the way that played out. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Digg, Reddit, they're in the same conversation, but Digg was much bigger, much more mainstream, had much more momentum. The founder, Kevin Rose, was on the front of time and various things as this wonder kid, wonderkind. And then they released a big release, Digg 4.0. It broke everything that everybody loved about Digg. It really kind of felt like a betrayal. They couldn't roll it back. Everything was wrecked, and the whole thing just cratered, and Reddit kind of sailed past. And so, Kevin Rose has been plenty successful. He's invested in a lot of stuff, Uber and whatever, made a lot of money. He's gotten a lot more gray hair now. And here's the fun part. Him, Alexis Ohanian, who created Reddit, they were like arch nemesis of each other. Alexis has since left Reddit and is now joining Kevin to relaunch Digg, which is like a crazy, crazy thing. So, I should have said this earlier, but Digg was sort of the front page of the social web. It was like if you made it on TechCrunch or you made it on Digg, your traffic would explode. It'd be huge. Now it's more like Hacker News and Product Hunt and other things. But, everybody was paying attention to TechCrunch and Digg back in the day. They had this podcast or this video show called Digg Nation. They're relaunching the whole thing. The two enemies from Reddit and Digg camp have joined forces to relaunch Digg. It's a crazy story. It's kind of fun, and it'll be interesting to see where they go with it. Can they try to catch up and maybe blow by Reddit this time and sort of have a new horse race. What do you reckon, Yaniv?
I mean, I think you're showing your age. I don't know. It's just like when a rock band that everyone stopped caring about gets back together. Like, yeah, it's one for the old timers. But you know what? I was never really a Digg guy. I was a Slashdot guy. So,
Yes, Slashdot. Yes.
Before Digg, there was Slashdot, whose URL was www.slashdot.org. So the whole thing was just a stupid like wordplay, and it was also another front page of the internet led by a man called Commander Taco. So those were much more innocent times. Yes, and let's see. I suspect that this will vanish without a trace, but maybe I'll be wrong.
They've got deep pockets. They've got deep brand awareness amongst a certain group of people of a certain age. They've got good experience building companies. Maybe it's a vanity project. Maybe it becomes a thing. I noticed also the Twitter and blogger guys, Ev Williams, has launched another social app called Mosey. These guys built Blogger, they built Twitter, they know social. And Mosey is so the renaissance for social apps.
Renaissance for a bunch of 40-somethings relaunching old social apps from the 90s, perhaps.
Well, and Mark Zuckerberg has promised that there will be a big change to Facebook, that they're reinvesting in Facebook, which I think is actually, a massive strategic mistake that they underinvested in Facebook. And so, yeah, there's going to be I think there's an opportunity to build a new class of social apps. And so I'm seeing a lot more founders talk to me about social apps. And I think there is a window there. I'm actually helping two founders with two social apps right now. And I think it's a good time to do social again.
I mean, definitely there's a lot of disruption and a lot of, I would say, I don't know to what extent the politics figures into this, but there is obviously a lot of disgust with X and Elon Musk, but I think also an increasing movement of disgust towards Meta and Mark Zuckerberg. So I think people are looking for something where they don't feel like their values are fundamentally misaligned with the owners and with the leaders of that company. So I think that is an opportunity there. Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
Hey, before we move on to the next topic, let's talk about the Startup Podcast Pact, which asks if you've been getting value from this episode and some of the other episodes. We only ask for one thing in return. Please subscribe to us in your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a shout out, help promote the show. It helps us grow the show, help more founders, and get awesome guests. All right, let's get back into the rest of the show. Now we're going to move on to Trend Corner. We have two topics we want to discuss today. One that I'm bringing up, one you have as well, Yaniv, I believe. Just to remind everybody, the Trend Corner is not necessarily breaking news, but it's some kind of meta trend or under-discussed theme or topic that we think deserves a little bit of attention, that we want to discuss and debate it. We want to think about it with the audience. We want you to join us in the comments and opine about it. And so it's maybe a little bit less topical, although it can be topical, but a little bit more broader, a little bit more meta, a little bit more connecting the dots. The first one I wanted to discuss was actually something that Chamath said on the recent All In podcast, which I thought was really interesting. I have a lot of problems with some of those guys and some of what they say, but I thought this one was an interesting one. He described some of the MAGA movement, in his continuous effort to try to justify and find value in what Trump does. He described it as moving from a world of blurred lines to a world of clear, bright, dividing lines. And I thought that was an interesting framing. So the examples that I might give for this, he gave some of these examples and different examples, is moving from this world of like, we're just not really sure if Bitcoin is okay and if it's going to be part of the financial system or not. And we'll sort of litigate it through the courts to Bitcoin is good, Bitcoin is regulation, Bitcoin strategic reserves, Bitcoin is okay and is part of the financial system. We're going to clarify where you stand with Bitcoin. Moving from, this one is an interesting one. And by the way, I'm not saying these are good things, and I'm not saying these are actually what Trump's trying to do. I'm not saying these are actually things Trump should do, but I do think they're consequences, intended or otherwise. Another example here is US aid. US aid is really, if you think about it, and it's no secret, it's been used as an instrument of foreign policy, right? Like, we'll give you money if you follow our values, or we'll give you money so you're beholden to us, and we're going to also set up a military base there. Or you can't say no to us when we want to go to war, and we want you to join us because, hey, by the way, half your country is funded by our US aid system. So there's this kind of blurry line between US aid and foreign policy and military policy. And so what he's saying is that Trump is like going, fuck that. We don't need to support these people. We're just going to be might through right. Foreign policy is foreign policy. Military is military. Aid is aid. He's talking about the separation between Europe and the US. It's like, it's not this weird Western conglomerate. There is the US and there is Europe, and we don't need to be all conflated together in all blurry lines of interdependence. I'm adding to the list Israel-Palestine. There's this kind of blurry line of like, well, the US is this independent broker and it's a mediator and a moderator and a blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, fuck off. Israel, we support Israel. We're going to move the capital over here. We're going to suspend thing over there. We're going to take over Gaza over there. It's like Israel is the answer. They're our partner, full stop. Ukraine and Russia. It's like, well, we want to support Ukraine, but we're not in the war, but we're supporting Ukraine, and we're not really sure where it's going to go, and we don't want to let them die, but we don't want to start World War III. It's like, no, fucking end the war. It's over. We're done. Clarify the lines. We're not going to just keep supporting this war with this vague outcome. He also went on to talk about gender, right? There's no longer a spectrum of gender. I'm not saying I believe in this or advocate for this, but he's saying on this trend is, no, there's only two genders, male, female. That's what they're saying. And I'm also adding this idea of like, why are we going to hire people? We're going to hire them for DEI. We're going to hire them for rebalancing quotas, no, we're only going to hire them for meritocracy. We're going to remove all other information from the equation. So again, I'll summarize by saying I'm not saying these things are good or bad. I'm not saying they're intended or unintended. I'm not saying that Trump has this theory of mind to clarify boundary conditions in the world. I'm saying this just seems to be what is happening. And it's a very interesting observation that might help you understand the world a bit in this crazy, chaotic era.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, it strikes me as a load of bollocks. I don't even accept the premise. Like, to use example of the Ukraine-Russia situation, we actually moved from a very clear line, which is Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine has a right to defend its territorial integrity, and we will support them to, I don't even know what, but it certainly isn't a nice, clear line.
That's what I'm saying, we'll support them to I don't know what is that, like, where does this go? But hang on, I want to talk about that just for a second, just because why not? It's our podcast and we can talk about whatever we want. Mm-hmm. Everyone on the left is saying, the big problem with the Trump, Russia, Ukraine meeting in the Oval Office is Trump is forgetting who the aggressor is, and why are we now relitigating who the aggressor is? And no, Russia is the aggressor. And I just think this is entirely missing the point.
Is it?
I don't think Trump talks very much about who the aggressor is at all. He doesn't, he every now and then he will say Zelensky was stupid or NATO was stupid or, Russia had some reasons. But that's not the thrust of his argument. Trump does and says a lot of stupid fucking things. Harping on who the aggressor is not his point. His point is, I don't care who the aggressor is. I don't care who's right. I want the killing to stop, and I'm willing to give up Ukrainian territory for it to stop. And I don't care about the long-term ramifications of that in terms of sovereign territory, sovereign integrity, European encroachment. I don't give a fuck. I want the war to stop. I want the people to stop dying. That's what he's saying.
That's what he's saying, but it's not what he means. Like, I think it would take an extreme level of naivety to think that Donald Trump gives a shit about people being killed over in Ukraine. I don't know what he's playing at, but he sure is acting like a Russian asset to me. Like, it is not that he wants people to stop dying. It's that he is actually parroting Russian propaganda to basically allow them to keep the territorial gains. And it is appeasement at best. And that tends not to work very well.
I think that's perfect. I think what we both said coexist perfectly fine. He could be a Russian asset. He could be screwing up the theory of territorial sovereignty, NATO, whatever, European defense. All of that can be true. And he is not using the argument of, well, Ukraine was the aggressor or Russia was not the aggressor, therefore. He's using, and so I don't know why liberals keep saying, no, Russia was the aggressor and Donald Trump is not believing that. That's not his argument. So why do we keep going back to that? It's like he's saying, I don't care who the aggressor is. And so it just seems like a really weak argument. Let's say that he's a Russian asset. Let's say he doesn't understand territorial integrity. Let's say he doesn't understand the defense of Europe and why it's in the US's best interest. But let's not harp on this question of like, Donald Trump doesn't know that Russia was the aggressor. Who fucking cares? He knows they're the aggressor. Doesn't need to go say it every 5 minutes.
Well, I mean, okay, I profoundly disagree with what you're saying, because I think you're giving Donald Trump altogether way too much credit based on his actions. So, but I also think you're giving Chamath way too much credit, who is a craven toady for Trump, and his sophistry here, where he's saying that we've moved from a world of blurred lines to clear lines. No, we've just moved from a world where there is an attempt at morality to a world where there are these arbitrary distinctions based on Donald Trump's caprice, based on what his backers think they want to improve their own wealth and power. It's very reductionist, and to say that there's a sort of new way of thinking other than authoritarianism and corruption is just not something I buy.
No, so here's the thing. Actually, I think this articulation of the framework, which is like this moving from blurred lines to bright boundaries, is a very correct insight. Where I think he's wrong, I think his insight is correct. I think where he's wrong is the implications of that. The world has blurry lines because the world is complicated. It is not reductive and black and white. And so where he might be describing it as a positive thing, I would describe it as a negative thing. That it's a reductionist, reductive, black and white, unnuanced view of the world. So I don't think the argument against Chamath's worldview is that he's wrong. I think he's right in his observation. He's wrong in the implication that it's a dumb way of thinking about the world.
I mean, I just don't even necessarily think it's true, but like it's sophistry to me, right? You can say, oh, look, that was a blurry line. This is a clear line. Or you can say we've just prioritized different things, right? I just don't see that there's a sudden clarity. Like, where's the clear line in Doge? Like, Doge is just a complete shit show, right?
Oh, that's why I didn't include Doge in my list of examples.
Well, yeah, okay, but then it's sort of like cherry picking in a sense. I just think that it's a much better explanation for Trump's actions are a combination of his own narcissism and the greed and the corruption of those he has surrounded himself with. I think that has much more explanatory power than clear lines and blurry lines.
I don't know why you would describe it as sophistry. I think if this is one of the byproducts of Trump's behavior, that is useful to note. I'm not saying it explains the behavior. I'm not saying it's his intent, but I am saying it is one of the consequences. We can certainly and may certainly want to go upstream to understand the root causes of why he's behaving that way. And I agree with you. It's some combination of power, hunger, and capriciousness. And that's right. The consequences of which are these two-dimensional black and white hard lines from things that were once blurrier and more intertangled and more nuanced and subtle, for better or for worse. And I think for the most part, for worse. I think, let me tell you where some of it is for better, and it's counterintuitive, perhaps. You and I have had episodes about Israel-Palestine. We've talked about how you're Israeli, I'm Palestinian. I actually think for better, there is an argument to be made that a clarifying of the lines that the U.S. supports Israel. U.S. has really very little interest in being an honest broker between the two. I think that's been true for decades. And I think the sophistry is there. The sophistry has been damaging, dangerous, and destructive. And it has kept a group of people with false hope and radicalized them and injured them no end. And I think saying, no, actually, Jerusalem is off the table. No, actually, your sovereignty is off the table. No, actually, the Abraham Accords means you guys have no power. The Arab world doesn't give a fuck about you. And actually, it's over. And so you now need to find a way to integrate or get along. Now, this is a very, 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 a very unpopular opinion on the pro-Palestinian side. But actually, we just need to move forward from here. you have nothing, you will get nothing. What next? I think that is enormously clarifying for the people that are living in quiet desperation, living in false hope. And so I actually think there are positive consequences for that. Actually, I shouldn't say quiet desperation, loud desperation.
Loud desperation. Yeah.
All right. So this is a heated one. That was Chamath's thoughts. This was some of the examples. Is this just reverse engineering Trump's chaos? Is this just sophistry, or is this an interesting worldview that helps clarify your decision making? Jump down in the comments and let us know your thoughts.
I feel like segueing from this to the next topic is all but impossible.
Good luck.
I wanted to talk about the new hot metric in AI, revenue per employee, and what this means, right? So it's something that, VCs have cared about on and off for various years, but suddenly I see it on the front pages and on LinkedIn and in social media in general, this idea of this new generation of startups that are AI startups or driven by AI that have two things that are, in a sense, unprecedented. One is an insane level of growth in their annual recurring revenue, new milestones, fastest to 10 million ARR and so on, compared to a previous generation of SaaS startups and whatnot. And the other is the revenue per employee, right? Companies like Cursor that are making tens, maybe already hundreds of millions of dollars in ARR, doing it with a few dozen employees. So if revenue per employee is exactly what it sounds like, which is divide the total revenue by the number of employees. So a good benchmark in the past was maybe a few $100,000 revenue per employee. Now we're talking millions and millions of dollars for these startups. And the question is, and I've got opinions, I'm interested in yours too, Chris. Is this just a little bit of hype where we've got, VC-backed startups that are growing very fast? We don't know if the growth is sustainable. We don't know if any of this is profitable or if they're just kind of selling $1 for 90 cents, which is always a good way to grow quickly. Or are we moving into a new world where the power of AI, the power of these platforms, the extra leverage, the extra capital efficiency, we were talking about it earlier, means fundamentally that benchmark is being reset and that the revenue per employee number that should be considered good has gone up. And then what are the implications for founders? What are the implications for the startup ecosystem more generally?
I think it's both. I think, again, we like to brag about this, but this idea of $1 billion company with 3 employees, that meme was invented here on this show by Ben Parr, popularized by Jeremiah.
Right here on this show.
Popularized by Jeremiah on LinkedIn, hit millions of views, and it's in the water, right? It's not. I guess it's not an idea other people couldn't have come to, but we certainly, I think, were amongst the first to come to it. And so, yes, will there be $1 billion company with 3 employees at some point? Maybe, and the revenue per employee will be astronomical, right? And so, yeah, I think that's a real thing. But I also think, as you're alluding to, a lot of these companies are pumped up and have artificial growth, and these companies haven't met the fullness of their obligations to their customers yet. So when you add enterprise sales, you add enterprise customer support, you add multiple missions, visions, products, suites, growth, everything. When you actually build these businesses out, I think they're going to have, more obligations, more costs, and ultimately a slightly lower revenue per employee in the fullness of time. But I do, I think the productivity of the economy generally, and the productivity of startups and scale-ups and companies specifically is going to go through the roof. That's the whole point. And so, yeah, that's what the whole AI investment, the whole AI play is. So yeah, it just seems like an obvious, inexorable part of the next 10, 20, 30 years.
I'm inclined to agree with you. Like, there's a whole lot of hype here, right? I think these companies are doing a bit of a VC arbitrage. Like I said, it's not very hard to make lots of money when you are basically selling an amazing product at below cost price. And I think that's what's happening a lot of the time here. But at the same time, there is that huge extra bit of leverage, right? And so I think there is hype layered on top of a secular trend where we're going to get more productivity. And this is really, really exciting for the startup ecosystem, because if you think about this, if you can build a really big startup with fewer people, that means you are more capital efficient. That means that both as a founder or from an investor side of the table, the returns here are basically increased, right? Because we're getting more leverage from what we do, right? So whereas it used to require hundreds of people just to set up an on-premises data center and, install racks and all of this stuff, and then the cloud allowed all these SaaS businesses to start up with fewer people. Now, AI is allowing you to do more and more things with fewer people. That allows for faster growth while spending less money. And so I think, especially if you're an early stage investor, this is a very exciting time. And of course, if you're a founder as well. So I do think that this revenue per employee discussion, I'm kind of glad it's coming out there as a trend, because although it's overhyped, I think it is pointing to something very real. And that as a startup founder, you should be thinking of that. And then maybe just to tie a bow on this and to go full circle in this episode and talk about what I was saying earlier on, Chris, with the general economic uncertainty and with founders needing to be more capital efficient. It has never been a better time to be capital efficient. And, a couple of the startups I've invested in, I've had founders who've just raised a decent sized round and they're looking to hire. And my advice to them has been straight away, think twice before you make that hire. Do you really need to hire an engineer or a designer, or can AI do it for you at this stage, right? And of course, it's always good advice. Think twice before you hire. But right now, even more so, like just as a founding team, you can get a pretty long way. And so think twice, because employees are actually a really great expense. And, I think every startup will need employees as they scale up, but the timing and the number that you bring on, I think all of that has been meaningfully delayed, and this is a permanent change. And you need to change your mindset as a founder to really, not just to take advantage of that, but to survive in this new world.
Yeah. Just to broaden this out a little bit, the history of the world, much less the history of technology, has been about giving human beings superpowers and greater leverage, right? The old classic Steve Jobs conversation about the bicycle of the mind, whether, just to give some more recent examples, desktop publishing, new and modern software stacks, which go higher up in abstractions, cloud services, now AI. We have been on this kind of Moore's law exponential curve of productivity for as long as human history. And so even the invention of fire allowed us to digest food more quickly so that we could spend less time digesting and all this kind of stuff. So it's all been about productivity and energy consumption. But I just want to caution here that revenue per employee is not your primary goal. Yaniv, you and I talk about this all the time. I just posted about this last week on LinkedIn and got a lot of blowback. Revenue is not your goal. Meaningful runway moving revenue, big revenue that changes your runway, is not your goal in an early stage startup. Solving problems, product market fit, and scalability is your goal. Revenue is not something you want to avoid, but it's not something you want to prioritize. Use it as a signal for product market fit, not as a way of extending your runway. Same here. Revenue per employee is something worth optimizing for, something worth observing, something worth taking advantage of, but it is not the thing you should be optimizing for as your primary goal. Your primary goal is to solve problems. And sometimes, as the cliche goes, do things that don't scale on your way to solving problems. Just very quickly, that last statement, do things that don't scale, is often used as an excuse to do the shitty revenue gain. And like, Airbnb guy said, do things that don't scale. We're doing services business that doesn't scale.
We're selling cereal.
Yes, it's so crazy. Do things that don't scale to bootstrap your scalable business. So what he was talking about was go take photos and post them on the Airbnb marketplace. He didn't mean go build a fucking services business. So optimize for solving problems, optimizing for scale. In there, if you can optimize for your revenue per employee, then definitely keep an eye on that.
So what are you doing to make your startup more capital efficient? Jump into the comments and let us know how you're optimizing it. All right. Well, I think that is our reacts for this week, Chris. Fun conversation as usual, a good combination of tech, business, and politics. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
You can find me on all the social media at Chris Saad. I think I've been unshadow banned from LinkedIn, so if you can join me on LinkedIn at Chris Saad there, and you can find me at my newsletter, chrissaad.com/newsletter, and we can work together if I have some space in my portfolio over at chrissaad.com/advisory. Yaniv, how about you?
I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it less boring. I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners, so hit me up, let me know where you came from, and I will be delighted to be connected. All right, Chris, that was fun as always. Have a good one.
All right, catch you next one. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.